Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Jonas Z, Alan B, Ken X, and Mike P. Back on the program today is Mr. Bill Sheriff. Bill is the executive chairman of Encore Energy, a leading United States ISR uranium-focused development company with various stage development assets, with its Rosita facilities in Texas, the Dewey Burdock project in South Dakota, and the Gas Hills uranium project in Wyoming, among a notable portfolio of other uranium assets in the U.S. Encore Energy is a uranium portfolio holding at SmithWeekly Research. Encore Energy is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol EU and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol ENCUF. Mr. Sheriff, great to have you back on the program.
Thanks, Andrew. Good to be back.
Now, Bill, I understand you are on site visits in Texas. How are things going, and what are you seeing out there that you can share with the audience?
Well, lots of progress. Of course, the drilling continues. We've got 3 rigs turning. Put out a press release, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now, maybe 5. It's been a bit of a blur with drill results. We subsequently have moved to a new area, delineating another slightly better project than we were on. But well field installation is going along. Monitoring wells I've already got a half a dozen of those in place, cased, pressurized. So it's moving along quickly, and lots of changes. We had a group tour out there probably 2 or 3 months ago now, but going back just in that short period of time, the plant is almost complete on refurbishment, brand new pumps everywhere. So you can see a lot of change in what's been happening, and the market notwithstanding, it's been hard to imagine it being much uglier over the course of the last couple of weeks, or month. And I'm not expecting a whole lot different for the Dow and the broad market. I think those are probably in trouble on the longer stage. But the uranium, I think we're looking for a bottom. And I think if you look at the uranium price itself, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. It's not taken near the damage of the equities. And in fact, most of that uranium sell-off was a one-day event due to a shipping issue developing in the port of St. Petersburg, which of course is a war-related anomaly. Turns out one shipper couldn't get insurance, so had to make a deal literally on the docks of St. Petersburg. So obviously was a buyer's market at that point, but it certainly dented the overall price.
Yep. I was going to ask you just your thoughts just a little bit more on the broad markets here, and where do you see the deleveraging stopping with respect to uranium? Do you see a disconnect happening sometime this year? What's your thoughts on how the broad markets go versus commodities, uranium, et cetera?
I do. I think the broad markets. I see the economy going into a slowdown. I don't think there's much to argue about that. I think that's coming. In terms of the broad markets, I think the Dow will see 27,000 this year. I know not what most people want to hear, but nonetheless, there's some good technical arguments for it. Things changed starting in January. No longer was it buy a dip market, which we've seen for the last decade. It's been a sell the rally market. But I think the real impact on the uranium stocks has been the fear factor and the mini liquidity crisis that the market's caused on its decline. It's been such a precipitous sell-off in the broad market that people get margin calls. People need cash, and they look around, and they don't usually sell their losers. They usually sell their winners, which is the exact opposite of what you probably should do. And so uranium's seen a lot of liquidation. There are a lot of people. We can remember our astronomical rise, over the last 24 months. Not just ours, but the whole sectors. And so it was a good source of cash for people. I think they've taken that. I do think the market's going to slow down in its speed, and that's the key, is because the market can decline in an orderly manner and not create fear and not create these liquidity crises. And so it's been pretty choppy the last this entire week, frankly, and I think it's looking for a tradable bottom, a meaningful tradable bottom, and I think that's really key to the stability of the market. Once we've stabilized, I think you'll see uranium bounce back pretty quickly. nothing goes straight up, including the uranium equities. And this is a great entry spot for those that missed because of its quick departure heading up. I think we'll have an orderly move back higher. And during that process, it'll probably separate some of the wheat from the chaff in terms of those with more immediate production potential and profiles.
Right. I like to see the spirits get dampened. I do like that. I think it provides opportunistic situations out there for folks, and it also buys time, which some of certain initiatives need, as you well know. And so I do like the conditions here in the market, specifically for uranium. And of course, things are lining up to be incredibly good over the next few years. I want to just talk briefly about long term impacts from the Ukraine Russia war and your opinion on how sticky these impacts are on the fuel cycle.
I think they're going to be quite sticky. In fact, we've noted of late a significant shift in that. We were contacting fuel buyers, nuclear utilities, our end user, ultimate customer, uh, over the course of the last year. But in the course of the last couple of months, that's changed pretty dramatically. In that now we're receiving quite a few inbound inquiries, and certainly more than one or two plant visits. Basically inspect and see if we're going to be able to meet long-term contracts. We have already got three established. I think ourselves and Cameco, according to UXC, are the only two North Americans with established contracts. That may have changed. That's a dated publication, probably about a month ago. But I can see the utilities wanting to make sure, yeah, they don't want to buy Russian uranium. Whether there's an official ban coming or not, we'll see. But there's a practical interruption, if not outright ban, just in terms of it's very difficult to find anybody that's going to ship uranium from Russia right now. The utilities are clearly concerned about safety of supply. Fortunately, the utilities from the power supply position, they contract out several years. So, it's not, if Russia were to get cut off tomorrow, it doesn't mean they run out of uranium tomorrow afternoon. But it's certainly something they're aware of and, looking for fueling in 2024 and beyond. And so I think, even if peace were to break out overnight, which seems highly unlikely, I think you'd see a lasting stigma on bringing in Russian uranium. And for that matter, Kazakh uranium is, under a pretty big stain as well. I wouldn't call them a satellite state of Russia, but certainly when they have problems, that's who they call. During the recent coup attempt there, or civil uprising, whatever you want to call it, they called the Russian troops in to keep the peace. So that shows a pretty close alignment, and there's always been a close alignment there. So, not to mention the Kazakh uranium for the Western world goes through the port of St. Petersburg, and so you just have some issues there. And I think they're going to stick around. Not to say we'll never use any Russian or Kazakh uranium. I think that's not the case. But there's certainly going to be a move towards lessening of reliance upon it. And it's going to be a profound move, and it certainly favors U.S. domestic producers.
Spot on. Fully agreed on that, and we'll see what happens here. But certainly, it's going to be a 5 year plus process, and the damage has already been done.
Yep.
Certainly, Kazakhstan is the ultimate beneficiary of the Russian influence there. But let's talk a little bit about a number of inquiries on this. Actually, Bill, investors are wanting to hear more on the NASDAQ listing and when that will occur. Any updates on this?
Well, the only thing I can tell you is we've been fully vetted in terms of filling out our applications and being accepted. The one thing we don't meet yet is the minimum price threshold, and that's $3 US. We've always said there'd be a rollback or share consolidation to achieve that, but it's just a function of after being 50% of the stock price being removed over the last month, basically, like everyone else in the uranium industry, some far worse than that. It's just not a good time to do a rollback. We would end up having a number of shares out there that would be not really provide the liquidity that you're going to need on a big board. So we'll wait for a bit of a rebound in the price and then do it. We literally can do it, I won't say in an instant, but certainly within a matter of a couple of weeks once we pull the trigger. And right now it's strictly market oriented. We were on the verge of doing it right before this latest cascade event of selling. And so once that's passed, we'll get back in there. It's obviously an objective for us. Increases liquidity, provides us access to an awful lot of capital sources and doors. Not that we need any right now, but it gets us in front of a lot of the right people that we would not get in front of otherwise with just the Vancouver listing. But having raised the money to get to production here during our last raise, we've got a distinct advantage during this time of turmoil and market instability, in that every morning we wake up and go to work working on the business plan. It's set plan in terms of getting into production, and got the capacity to do it in terms of personnel, projects, licenses, and most importantly is the capital in the bank to do that. So we received a bit of criticism at the time for taking $30 million as being maybe more than we needed at the time. Why not raise a bit more later at a higher price? And to that, 2020 hindsight's pretty clear, but right now, it looks like it was a really great thing to do. And in my view, when they offer you money to get to production, it just makes sense. Take it, because you don't know what's coming in the future. None of us could have predicted these, turmoil in the world and in the market 6 months ago or even 3 months ago. A very good feeling to be funded through to production, where we can just put our heads down and continue our work and get that done on time and on budget.
Talk about that for a moment, where you guys are in the cash position, and then I guess transition that right into Rosita. Next plans, maybe give us a little bit of a timeline.
Yeah, well, we've got roughly 25 million in the bank. Ordered one of the biggest CapEx items we have for the well field is PVC piping, for instance, and it's one of the things that's kind of scarce in the supply chain, but we were able to source through some variety of connections in South Texas enough to do more than we need on our first well field, and that's on site. Virtually everything we need is on site. Most of the procurement has happened. Obviously, there'll be additional expenses in terms of time and salary and getting from here to there. But the plant's still scheduled to be completed during the second quarter. Then we'll start putting it through its tests and the commissioning process, 30 to 60 day commissioning process. And then we'll be all set for production early next year. And as I say, the well field on a separate track, but similar timeline, parallel, is undergoing final stages of delineation drilling and installing the well field.
Very well. I appreciate that, Bill. Talk about the upside there with the projects and the feed coming into Rosita and your guys' holding in the state of Texas. And then also, do you see Kingsville Dome and some of the equipment there, capacity expansion at Rosita, are all these also on the playbook?
They are, and our team has been recently strengthened. Our bench support with Peter Luthiger coming in as our COO. Years of decades of experience running ISR, most notably at Alta Mesa in Texas. Worked with Paul a number of years, and so it gives us enough capacity to run down several tracks at once. One of the things we'll be doing late this year is looking at an optimization study between whether we increase Rosita's capacity. Keep in mind that ISR plant was built with an anticipation of 2 million pounds a year. The current run rate, which is limited only by the equipment there, is 800,000 pounds a year capacity design. And Kingsville was the same. In fact, Kingsville had a 2 million pound capacity until their 1.2 million pound capacity dryer ran through the end of its life cycle and has not been replaced. So we've got a number of options. Would we go out and bring in a 1.2 million pound dryer at Rosita and install it? Certainly the foundation's still there, a bit of piping and plumbing, and we'd be all set. Most importantly, we don't need, and obviously there'd be some CapEx. We look at $4 or $5 million to increase the capacity. But the parts are there. We can do that. Certainly we have a staff there that can do most of the installation work. Or do we look at revamping the Kingsville plant, much as we've done Rosita over the course of the last year, and have a second facility? And it's really going to be a cost benefits trade-off. I think ultimately, if you look down the road 2 or 3 years, both will have happened. Both increasing increasing Rosita and restarting Kingsville. But it's a little hard to predict with specificity how far, in 2 or 3 years out. But I think you'll see that coming along, and a lot of that's due to our new projects that we've been picking up. Unfortunately, for I guess the investors, can't be completely transparent in terms of what projects we've picked up in Texas, other than generically the Upper Sand Creek project, for instance, that we talk about, until we get every last piece of property. And it's not like Wyoming or Utah where you can go out and pick up the entire project that you want for, in 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 weeks, get broad chunks of land. And that is because all the land in Texas is private. And it's, a lot of the land records go back to the Spanish Empire. So, and through the time Mexico owned Texas, and through the Texas independent, when it was an independent country from 1836 to 1845. And many of these ranches have been, split each time the generation moves on. And so we've got some instances with, several hundred people on title on a single block of property. And it's a cumbersome project, but one that's certainly well worth it to, find everybody, get them to sign onto the leases and move forward. Now that's an extreme case. More often it's 5 or 6 or, 7, but nonetheless, it just points out you've got smaller tracts of land with multiple owners. And, the big plus is it's worth it because it's private land and a whole lot easier to work on and obviously mineralized in most instances. But we're moving ahead very quickly. We expect to be able to say more concrete things and actually start drilling on that, at least the first of those projects here in the not too distant future, certainly before the end of the year. And at the same time, it's not what we need for our initial feed or our initial production or our initial contract that we'll have to honor in 23. So that'll all come from Rosita. When we announced our last drilling at Rosita, or the first of our drilling at Rosita, we announced discovery of 8, possibly as many as 12 additional mineralized units down beneath the area of the plant in the licensed area and within the aquifer exemption area, which is key. Even in Texas, you have to get aquifer exemptions, which is a federal permit. And it's the only thing you have to deal with the feds, but it's still something, a bit of a bottleneck. And, some of these projects we're working on are well advanced through that project, or through that process, rather. And so it'll add to a very nice sequence of additions to the hub and spoke or satellite plants, if you will. And we've got the CapEx for the satellite plants to actually, sorry, we don't need CapEx for them. We actually own the materials to build them in-house. And the mills were designed for that satellite process. So it's here get a step ahead on all of these things. Will they take additional capital? Sure. But most of the work we can do ourselves, which is a big key. Having an experienced staff of 20 some people on the ground is just sounds like something that, well, of course you would, but in uranium, no, of course you wouldn't. There's just not too many guys around that have been doing it very long.
Great progress. Looking forward to seeing more. Well done by Paul in stripping off Peter and bringing him on board. That's great. I like satellite analogy with these. Let's avoid hub and spoke because, as you know, that's been worn out by others.
It is. In fact, I hear someone's trying to patent the word now, which is kind of funny since it's been around for, I don't know, several decades in the rest of the mining world. But in any event, it's it's a sound concept when you've got a licensed plant and whatever you want to call it. Loading your resin, and you still have a plant at the remote location, if you will, and you've got to still load your resins, and then you truck them to the central processing plant. But what it does avoid is having to build multiple central processing plants, and then that is your that's your bottleneck in terms of permitting. It's key to have multiple deposits that can feed a single plant.
Give us a brief update on Dewey Burdock status and also any work ongoing at Gas Hills.
Well, we're just starting. I'm going to take those out of order. Gas Hills, when we first got them, we said it'd be a bit of a horse race, even though Gas Hills had just, hadn't even started permitting, but Dewey Burdock was well into the permitting, and it is turning into a real horse race, just because, the federal government's not particularly cooperative at this point in terms of moving things forward. They're very pro-nuclear and very pro-development in terms of what's spoken, but in terms of what actually is happening, it couldn't be much more opposed to that. And so Dewey Burdock is one thing, but Gas Hills, we've started the permitting process. Being Wyoming will make it a lot easier. It is an agreement state. It's still a year or two, probably 2-year process, maybe more. And there's obviously uncertainty in that timeline, but we're moving forward on it. Have already started that. South Dakota, we're waiting on one of the circuit courts to deal with an appeal to the NRC consultation and licensing that was in place. We are optimistic that we'll see the correct answer, and then we'll continue at the state level. but the state doesn't really want to move it forward until they see what the feds are going to say, and that's largely because of their experience with the XL pipeline that the state had spent a great deal of time on, looked like a certainty, and then the feds pulled the permit on it. So, yeah, we do expect political change. That seems to be pretty clear. Yeah, it's one of those things that you'd like to see happen a little sooner than it is. I think both of those will be fine. It has increased our interest in Texas, and very timely in terms of finding multiple horizons under the plant to find additional pounds in terms of picking up additional projects in the state. I won't say it's refocused us, but it's certainly made us aware of taking advantage of those things. We may be able to get up to 1.5 to 2 times what we'd originally planned in Texas over the course of the next few years as a result of some really good opportunities that have come our way and what we're finding in our own backyard.
Good stuff here. I mean, certainly the federal government's been very difficult. We've seen this with just delays across the board. It hasn't just been uranium projects. I mean, I would reference to Florence, Arizona, ISR copper being a continual delay. So we've seen this across the board in the natural resource sector. They're speaking out of one side of their mouth and spewing out the other end. So it's really something. As folks know, the company is focused on ISR projects. Does the focus remain on ISR, or is there opportunistic ideals? How about opportunistic ideas in conventional? And with that, let me just couple it. I know you can't say much here, but is there any comments with respect to M&A?
Sure. That's one of the, I guess, advantages that come out of these tumultuous periods in the market is M&A opportunities. Quite frankly, everything had reached a point, here a few months ago that there wasn't a lot on the market that was attractively priced. Are there other things that are of interest? Sure. Well, of course, now our capital has gone down as well as everyone else's. But these things do tend to go through a series of adjustments and separate the wheat from the chaff. At the moment, are there other assets out there we'd like to have? Sure. Are there any opportunities out there right now with current pricing? No. We'll need to see some pricing differential evolve in the market. I think we will as we perform and execute on our business plan. And so, we keep our eye on it. We know the assets on the playing field very well, or the pieces on the playing board, if you will. Know the people very well. We don't have any intention of straying from ISR. Just as example of bringing Peter in, all of our key adjustments and people have been, dedicated towards building the best bench in ISR. And to that end, I think we've been very successful. I think, if you look in North America, there's no other team that has the ISR strength that we do, and I'd put that up even against Cameco. And when you bring in the worldwide basis and you look at Australia and Kazakhstan, then certainly there are others that are, very, very deep. But in North America and the U.S., I don't think you'll find it.
Okay, how about just one other question from the audience here, types of uranium deposits that don't work for in situ recovery. Can you just talk about that?
I can briefly. Basically, anything that's primary, that is, that's been primarily deposited and has not been remobilized. Sandstone uranium deposits that have a lot of organic matter. The uranium is bound to that. It's not going to come out into solution very well. A lot of it is, so the uranium has to be in the right state or oxidation state to be able to be mobilized through ISR. That's really what that boils down to. Other than that, it's, conditions. Denison's taking on a really bold project in Canada doing ISR of a higher grade ore body, but it's behind freeze wall. So the CapEx is huge. The technology is huge. Seem to be making good progress on it. Obviously, we wish them well. But, it's a different game if you can actually work behind a freeze wall. There is such thing as too much water, and the Athabasca certainly is the place where that's an issue. And a lot of the ore up there is probably not in the right oxidation state, even as rich as it is, to be ISL. So it takes a specific set of chemical and physiographic, physical traits. Got to have permeability, porosity. You need a reasonable depth. You've got to have water saturation. So you need your water table above where you're working at a reasonable level. So even when you pump and draw down, you don't bring the water table below your ore. It's certainly feasible to go to, several thousand feet, couple thousand feet anyway with ISR, but your drilling costs are substantial. Your pumping costs may be offset by artesian factors, but you've got a lot of casing. You've got, just the problems and cost go up as the depth goes up. But pretty much anything under 1,000 feet is pretty routine. Hope that gives you a little better picture of it. And we do take an opportunity to pick up good conventional assets when we see them for a basement bargain price, but that's simply to put into our non-core asset file. It doesn't mean they aren't great projects, just means they aren't something we're going to work on because here again, our technical expertise has been honed and directed exclusively to ISR.
Let me tie this in real quick with an update on Group 11.
Sure. Group 11, we've been making progress, as you know, on our last test of actually getting increased gold recovery out of uncrushed core, which was actually amazing to everyone involved with the project, how well the recovery came. So we're in the process now of permitting several large diameter core holes. And by large diameter, we're talking S core or perhaps even up to 6-inch core. That will be, we found the contractor, as I say, permitting's underway in Wyoming. We expect to drill those before the end of the year, certainly, hopefully during the third quarter, because it tends to get somewhat inhospitable on that mountain in November and December. So we'd certainly like to be wrapping up by the end of October. Notwithstanding we don't have the permits in hand, everything looks good that we'll have them in time. Wyoming is pretty straightforward in terms of permitting drilling. So that's where we are on that. And once we get those cores, of course, then we'll perform whole core tests on large diameter materials such as horizontal transmission rates and connectivity and obviously permeability, porosity, structural content of the rock. And then after that, assuming we get continued optimism, then we'll be looking to do some sort of 5-spot test in the following year. Involving an aquifer, we need a federal aquifer exemption to put anything into the ground. So we'll be looking at that, and there may be some exceptions if it's a shallow enough well and above an aquifer. So may not involve that yet. But here again, that's putting the cart before the horse. Let's see what we get out of these next core holes first. But it's certainly very promising at this point.
Appreciate that update, and always a pleasure to work with the federal government, as you know. Well, let's leave it there. We're short on time, Bill. Last question here for potential investors tuning in. Market cap of Encore stands at about 381 million Canadian dollars. What would you say to them about considering the company at this stage and at this point in the market?
I think I'll go back to my opening remark. It's this onslaught or deluge of selling that we've seen over the last month has really arguably been a much needed correction. It was a little overdone on the top side. I think arguably it's a little overdone on the downside now. But the markets are rarely in equilibrium except when the pendulum crosses from oversold to overbought for brief moments. And I think it's providing an excellent opportunity, one that we haven't seen for a year, for people that didn't get in the first wave to jump in, for those that are already in to refortify their position and add to them. So it's been a very good opportunity for them, and what had been a bit of a runaway market that did not afford a lot of buying opportunities after it took off. The universe of uranium stocks is so small that once the money starts, the train takes off pretty quick, and it's hard to catch it.
And the best way for investors to reach out to the company?
Through info@encoreuranium.com. Once again, that's info@encoreuranium.com. One of us will be pretty quick to respond and can even speak with management or given some notice to set things up. So we're certainly easy to get a hold of and treat all of our investors or potential investors equally, and glad to entertain questions, observations, comments, what have you.
Bill, it's always fun to chat. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, Andrew. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend.